the first dig to the last nail. And remember, McAllen Construction also does snow removal, whether on private property or public property. I am Dan Lovallo. He is meteorologist Brad Field. And well, I think it's appropriate we talk about snow removal, Brad,
Yeah,
because
I do too.
meteorological winter starts today, December 1st. How about
I,
that?
I'm pretty sure, Dan, that McAllen and all of the other snow removal contractors across the state can take a little bit of a break until about December 10th. I am seeing at the end of this 10-day forecast a major shift in the weather pattern, Dan, that leads right into my predictions for the winter of 2022 and 2023.
Well, this is the much ballyhooed winter forecast, the much anticipated forecast that you have given for decades. And I know if you have a minute, how about reflecting on your career and what it has meant to you as far as giving this long range winter forecast?
Well, it's fun. I mean, I'm a very competitive individual. I pointed out about coaching, helping out coaching the varsity at Granby Memorial High School and so forth, and the competitive at bats that I want the kids to put up and so forth. Well, it's kind of competition for me too. It's kind of like me against the winter, me against Mother Nature. So I really do look forward to it, Dan. And I know a lot of the uh, people that listen to the Brad Field Weather podcast and who used to watch me on television would really get excited about the winter forecast. And so yes, it's an important day for me. I was saying to my wife this morning that, hey, Dan's going to call around 9:30 and we're going to do the podcast. And I said, today's the big day, the winter forecast. And she said, well, what are you predicting? And I told her, I'm not going to tell right now. And she said, how certain are you? And I said,
Mm.
quite. There are some times that you look at it and you think, there are just too many variables here, and I'm not seeing it, or I'm not really feeling it. But I think that this winter forecast that I'm prepared to give you today, Dan, has a good shot of being right. I mean, I kind of laugh at that. Obviously, when you're making a forecast, you want it to be correct. But this is kind of a tough thing. When I was in television, the most we ever did was 10 days. And the most we ever did was for Connecticut. Well, now we're a bit more excuse me, Dan. We're a bit more regional now. We do not only Connecticut, but we do all of New England. And it's not only for 10 days you're asking me for December of 2022, January of 2023, February of 2023, and March of 2023. Now, I believe I am a very good short term meteorologist, and I think I'm good in predicting snow and ice. That was always sort of my specialty. And people would come to me for that. We would always notice a bump up in the ratings at NBC Connecticut whenever big weather was coming in. And that all started back around 2011 when we had the October snowstorm.
Yeah.
And then in autumn of 2012, that would be Hurricane Sandy.
Right.
And then remember February of 2013, the greatest 24-hour snowfall in Connecticut history, when Ansonia received over 3 feet of snow in one 24-hour period. All of these events, NBC Connecticut spiked to number one in the ratings. So obviously, they were turning to me for the weather
Right.
in these short fused winter storm situations. Now, when we go a longer term, I do not think I'm a specialist. But as a meteorologist and a professional meteorologist who's attended many seminars and many professional meetings and so forth, there are people you get to know. Um, like I could tell you, I know meteorologists in every state, Dan, but there are meteorologists that are really good at looking at various things, putting it all in a mix and figuring it out and coming up with a winter forecast or a long-term forecast, not necessarily for winter, but long-term. And you look at things like, is it El Nino or is it La Nina? What about the volcanic activity in the past year?
Right.
What about sunspot activity? What about the Siberian snow cover in the fall going into that winter season? And there are these people that take those and other factors and put them all together to make a seasonal forecast. And I'd like to name a few for you, Dan.
Okay.
And if the folks at home want to grab a pen or something and jot down their names and how you can follow them and so forth. One gentleman is named Dr. Judah Cohen, and his first name is spelled Judah, and his last name is spelled Cohen. And he is with AER, which is Atmospheric and Environmental Research. And he makes winter forecasts based on Siberian snow cover. Now, you might think, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, snow begets snow. Snow is white, so it reflects incoming sunlight or incoming solar radiation that would heat up the ground. So the whiteness of the snow is one thing. Snow is a refrigerant. So if you have snow on the ground is going to be colder than if there's no snow on the ground. And he uses these Siberian measurements of snow cover and makes seasonal forecasts largely based on them. And you can see his work at Judah Cohen. I spelled it for you before, JUDAHCOHEN.org. So an interesting and very learned man. I mean, you look at some of his work. I was reading some of it this morning, and even being a meteorologist of my experience of over 4 decades of experience, Dan, a lot of it went right over my head. I mean, he delves into things deeply. So if you're interested in looking at his stuff, go to his website. Another gentleman who very much like me started off on television and now is a meteorologist specializing in prediction of extreme weather events. His name is Larry Cosgrove. And you can get Larry's work on any of the social media, such as I am on Twitter. Just Google his, not Google, just search his name, Larry Cosgrove. No tricky spelling there. And then you can just search his name on Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn. I believe I follow him on LinkedIn and Twitter. And then there's another meteorologist at AccuWeather. He's a senior meteorologist, Paul Pastelik, and he makes these winter time predictions. NOAA makes their prediction, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They make their predictions, Dan, largely based on, is it El Nino, is it La Nina, or is it neutral? And based on what you typically see in a winter pattern. Dan, we are in an ongoing La Nina. And if it persists throughout the winter of 2022 and 2023, it would be the third consecutive La Nina winter in a row. So that is one thing that factors into to my winter forecast. So I wanted to throw that out there first, Dan.
Okay.
It's kind of like if I was doing a report, the bibliography. I kind of gave you the
Right.
bibliography, like and the footnotes. Who am I citing? Who am I looking at?
Well,
Who do
let me
I like
toss
to read?
if I can toss this in for just a minute because I am sure you're factoring all of this into your calculations. But Matt Lanza tweeted. I don't know if you follow Matt on Twitter, but he tweeted forecast NAO Greenland blocking values are forecast in some modeling to dip below -3 next week. That has never happened in December per NOAA, and only 5 other daily instances back to 1950 exist.
Yes, I saw the NAO, the North Atlantic Oscillation, what you're referring to as the Greenland block, Dan, and it goes extraordinarily negative as we head toward the middle of December. Now, if that was the only ingredient in the pie, I would say, oh my goodness, winter Armageddon is about to happen. When I see that. But there are other factors that you have to calculate in. For one thing, I told you when I was working in the 1990s with my weekend meteorologist named Art Horn, who was very well known and very well liked across Connecticut. Art did a little bit of research. Our weather records go back to 1905, Dan. And you look at winters that were La Nina winters, you look at winters that were El Nino winters, and you look at winters that were ENSO neutral. And we found in Art's research that winters that were neutral, La Nina is, just think of it as cold waters in the tropical Pacific, colder than what's average. El Nino, warmer than what's average water temperatures in the tropical Pacific. And ENSO neutral, just right. It's kind of the Goldilocks of what and what that does is it impacts the downstream jet stream pattern of ridge, trough, all around the globe. Art found when we go ENSO neutral, we get our snowiest. So we only correlated, what is it? Is it La Nina, El Nino, or neutral? And what do we get for snow? We found in Art's research that we get the most snow in neutral winters. Now, let me give you this, Dan. This is unusual that this is the third La Nina winter in a row. I think from reading all the things I've read that La Nina will weaken as we go through the winter, and it may trend toward neutral. If that happens toward the end of the winter, we could have some big storms. And there's other reasons I have that in my mind too, and I'll explain those in a minute. But now let's get back to what you just said. The citing about the negative North Atlantic oscillation, in other words, the Greenland block. You get that massive blocking over Greenland and then up toward the Arctic Circle. What that is essentially a huge ridge in the atmosphere. We are downstream of that huge ridge. So what would that imply here? It would imply a huge trough. Now, what would fill in the trough? Cold air coming down from the north. Now, the snowfields are becoming incredibly well established across Canada right now. They're not here yet, but we talked about the snow reflecting the incoming solar radiation. We talked about the snow as a refrigerant on the ground, making the air colder, especially at night, which freezes the rivers quicker. We already talked about that last week, Dan, in our podcast about why did Buffalo get all the snow so early? This is where we have the big contrast between the water temperature of the Great Lakes and that Arctic cold that was pouring across them. When the Great Lakes freeze or start to freeze, there's no more contrast. The lakes essentially become land masses. So there's no difference in identity there. So that is, I'm kind of losing myself in my thoughts because I have so many. But the thing about the going with the strong negative NAO, that implies with the downstream troughing here, the cold air filling in that trough, that we are going to get a much colder December than we had last December. Now, I went back and I looked at a couple of things. Okay. Last December, Dan, 5.4 degrees above average for the December
Wow.
temperature.
Hmm.
You know what that did for the snow? We only had 4.2 inches of snow last
In
December.
December. Right.
Right.
Hmm.
And normally, the weather records, like I say, kept since 1905, we have 10 inches in the month of December. Now, keep that in your head. We were 5.4 degrees above average last December, and we had 4.2 inches of snow. December 2020, we were only 1.1 degree above average, but we had 13.3 inches of snow. So the point here is when we get closer to the average temperature for December, the snow totals go up to average and even blast past average. Now let's go back one more year. December 2019, we averaged 0.9 degrees below average per day. So in other words, about a degree colder than what the normal nighttime low is, about a degree colder than what the daytime high is. That winter, Dan, December 2019, 22 inches of snow. Now, that was at Bradley. I'm sure up your way in Torrington, it was
Right.
much, much more than
Yeah.
that. So my point being here, I am looking at this and I am seeing what you just saw through your reading. And the in units, you cited, I believe, -3
Right.
on the
And
NAO scale,
NAO, right.
and cited that as only happening, what, 5 times since 1950 or something?
Correct.
Okay. I saw the same thing. I did not have that background that you read about, but I saw the same thing and said, "Oh my goodness, this is wicked blocking occurring in Greenland," which would be huge ridging, which would induce huge troughing here. I see a cold December coming. And you might, in the next week or so, the first week of December here, you're going to say, Brad is nuts.
Well, Saturday
Brad's
it's supposed to go into the 50s, right? On
right.
Saturday?
You might say, love the guy, but Brad is nuts. But right, Dan, it is going to go into the 50s on Saturday, and it's going to go into the 50s once or twice next week. But we have a series of cold fronts coming. The snow pack in Canada is almost it's almost coast to coast, and it's growing. That is going to lead to more cold air. This ridging up in the northern climates from Greenland on up toward the Arctic Circle is going to force that cold air further to the south. We are going to have a cold December. I'm not saying I would bet the house on it, but I would bet a large, I'm not a bettor, but I'm cheap.
You'd
But
bet
I
the
would
garage.
bet, excuse me?
You'll bet the garage.
I'll bet the garage. There you go. Or the shed out back.
Or the shutout back. All right.
But in any case, Dan, it's going to be a cold December. So if you look at those two correlations I gave you of last winter being way above average temperature, snow totals being way down, then the previous 2 winters was a smidge above, 1 degree above and 1 degree below. And what did we end up having? 1 to 2 feet of snow during the month of December.
Right.
So I would say 1 to 2 feet of snow coming up this December. And I'm quite confident in that. And we're starting, we're starting off bad, because you could argue the first third of the month, if we divide it into December 1st through 10th, 10th through 20th, and 20th through the end of the month, we're starting off with the first third being warm. But I think that it's going to more than make up for it in the middle part of December and at the end part of December. And if you made me bet right now, I would say White Christmas right
Wow.
now. Yeah. I'm feeling pretty good about it.
Okay.
Now, we could play this tape back on Christmas Eve and go, Brad, you kind of blew it. But actually, I'm feeling quite strong about this prediction.
So I guess that's our cue to let's get into the winter forecast. What does it look like? What do you see?
Well, if you start off with what NOAA is going with, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they're going with a straight La Nina profile. When La Nina is occurring, what happens in the United States? And what happens in the United States typically is it's cold in the Pacific Northwest through the north central U.S., like places like Minnesota and North Dakota. And it's typically warm throughout the South and up along the eastern seaboard. So that's one prediction that I looked at. I don't agree with it, but I looked at it. All right. One other point I want to point out to you, Dan, that I looked at last year is, in hurricane season, the hurricane forecasters are always warning you, don't go by the number. Like, maybe we're down in tropical storm and hurricane action in any given year. But if in that given year a storm hits your state, that was a bad hurricane season. So change that over to a blizzard. Late January last year, we had a storm bearing down on southern New England, and there were all kinds of predictions. I'm not exactly sure what we predicted here, Dan, on the podcast. I really don't check myself and go back and look. You give it your best effort, then you move on to the next at bat. You struck out, but now I'm coming up again. I'm going to hit a home run this time.
Right.
But the blizzard of January 29th, 2022. Listen to this as you progress across southern New England. Boston, Logan Airport, on the 29th of January of this year, 23.5 inches of snow in Boston. One day, you come a little bit further to the west from Worcester south to Providence. Worcester, 14.7 inches. Providence, 18.8 inches. Now, you get in your car and you drive 50 miles west of Providence to Hartford. 6.8 inches. So my point is, there was a blizzard on the map last year. And instead of getting 2 feet, we got a half a foot. But the blizzard was there. It hit. And it hit very, very close. So what I'm saying to you is my winter forecast could be off by 1.5 feet.
All right.
If I'm predicting a couple of blizzards to hit, and one blizzard gives us 6 inches here, but 2 feet in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
So you see the difference there. It's just where the heavy banding sets up and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's one thing to consider. Another thing that we have to consider, and I do not know what the consequences of this will be, but the Hunga Tonga volcano, you go back and look at some of the winters, and it was in the 1800s, I think in 1815 and 1816, there was a volcanic eruption called Krakatoa. and it put so much volcanic ash and soot into the stratosphere, the upper levels of the atmosphere, that the sun gives us 100% of our heat energy. That's how we get our heat.
Right.
You're cold in your house, Dan. You walk over to the thermostat and you turn it up. You're hot in your house. You go over to the thermostat and turn it down. Well, we cannot turn the sun up and down. The sun burns, but not at a constant temperature. It depends on sunspots and solar activity and all of that, which has to calculate into a winter forecast, because essentially the sun is our thermostat. If something is preventing the sun from getting in, for example, if I had every shade in my house closed, all the curtains closed, we would get no sunlight coming into the house. Hence, we wouldn't get any warming from the sun coming into the house. Same thing with all this volcanic ash and soot in the upper levels of the atmosphere. If 100% of the heat energy is destined for the planet Earth, and 10% of it is getting refracted back out into space by the volcanic ash and soot, what's going to happen? The Earth is going to get colder.
Right.
And the summer of 1816, and I believe I have the year right. I will double check it, but no one was alive to prove it. But it was known as the year without a summer in New England, Dan. That volcanic ash and soot spread around the world, around the globe, refracted so much of the incoming solar radiation back out into space that the globe cooled, such that in New England, there are accounts of people wearing sweaters during the months of July and August, because we think now a t-shirt is too much to wear in July and August typically, but they were wearing sweaters because it was so cold. So you've got the effects of what happened just this year, the Tonga volcano, but because it was in the ocean and not on a landmass, instead of tremendous amounts of volcanic ash and soot, you had a lot of water vapor go up into the atmosphere. Water vapor can act as a greenhouse gas, and the impact of that could yield milder weather on the globe. So I look into this camera and say, honestly, I do not know. There are things that we don't know that we can admit. That I think the thing that bothers a lot of us, meaning meteorologists out in the professional community, is people think they know all the answers to everything. And the climate change is signed, sealed, and delivered 100% certainty or whatever. I believe there's a lot that we just don't know. And there are so many variables. Like I said, what if the sun starts burning at a lower temperature? What about all this volcanic ash and water vapor now up into the atmosphere? There are a lot of things. You could argue that climate change, or global warming as it was called a couple decades ago, would evaporate more water vapor off the oceans, which the globe is made up of 75% ocean, make more cloud cover across the whole globe, which would in essence cool the globe. So, you might have the idea right that more solar radiation is coming in, but you got the answer wrong. That used to happen to me on meteorology exams a lot. I'd have the theory right, but I'd get the answer wrong. So there's a lot of things that, Dan, we just do not know.
Right.
So I'm going to put that Tonga volcano into the unknown category.
Okay.
Another thing that I do know is that contrast is what fires up storms. So now as that snowpack that we talked about in Canada expands down into the United States and gets, all over New England, right, and all over the Great Lakes and Northeast, not just Buffalo, the whole area gets covered in snow. The cold air will come further south. and the cold air will come further south, such that by the time we get into February and March, guess what? The cold air is going to be down around Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana. So you got the Arctic cold getting down there toward the end of the winter because the snowpack keeps growing. But what else? The Gulf of Mexico is crazy warm. If our normal ocean water temperature, say off Nantucket, this time of year is 45. Say it was 55.
Right.
You would say that is crazy warm for the time of year. Well, crazy warm is happening in the Gulf of Mexico and all the waters around the Florida and Georgia coastline. So we've got that there. Warmer, way warmer than average. Now, if you bring down way colder than average temperatures and you put them in this little one or 200 mile distance, and you've got it really cold over Alabama, Mississippi, and Louisiana in February, and you've got it really warm in the Gulf of Mexico, as it should be for the time of year, you're going to spin up big storms.
Because of that contrast you're talking about.
Exactly. Usually, Dan, in a normal winter, we have to look at that contrast between the Gulf Stream waters and the Arctic air coming over the land masses. This year, I suspect the action is going to take place a lot more frequently and a lot closer to home than a couple hundred miles off in the Atlantic, where we have to watch the track and, gee, if the storm backs a little more to the west, it might throw its heavy snow back into Connecticut. I see a lot of big storms coming up the coast.
So a lot of nor'easters. A lot of nor'easters is what you're saying.
Especially, I think, in February and March. So I do sort of believe that December is going to set the table. It's going to set the table by being cold and putting down a lot of snow across a lot of the country. So we got a lot of snow across a lot of the country. The refrigerant, the snow, is going to force the warming much more to the south and suppress it to the south. Remember, we always talked about the cold air, kind of like the big lineman, right. the offensive line for the Giants or the Patriots or whatever. You see these 300-pound men pushing the warm air is not going to. And I always try to label the warm air like a lazy person. The warm air kind of runs up against resistance and says, "Oh, I've come far enough. I'm not going to try to go any further." And that's what always happens. And that's what always happens to a non-experienced New England forecaster. They think that because the computer model has it so warm, they think the warm front is just going to bomb through New England. And what ends up happening is you get a northerly wind of 3 miles per hour, a surface temperature of 28 or 29 degrees and freezing rain. You get these guys that have no experience in this area predicting that it'll be 55, windy, and raining. But the lazy person that I cited moves right up to Long Island Sound and then encounters the snow and the cold over Connecticut and the rest of New England, goes, I think I'll just stay here. Nah. And the warm front just stays right along the Sound. It doesn't come up. And it happens almost all the time. And we get the warm air breaks through like 5 minutes before the storm ends. And then all of a sudden the wind shifts into the northwest and the temperature's dropping again. So that is a big consideration, Dan. The Gulf of Mexico, water temperature warm. The ocean water off the southeast coast of the United States, warm. As the Arctic air moves south, as the winter progresses, the snowfields expand. The contrast between the cold land and the warm ocean is going to, you said the word, Dan, spin up nor'easters. And I see them coming in February and March especially.
So if you had to put a bow on your winter forecast, then how would you summarize it?
All right. I think the winter forecast will be cold. I know if we start off with meteorological winter being December 1st and going through December, January, and February, it will be cold. But if we go through astronomical winter, December 21st or 2nd or whatever it is, through March 21st or 22nd, I think it will be even colder, because I do see trending La Nina to neutral. And I do see cold December with snow, ramping up to perhaps some big snow toward the end of the winter. Now, you asked for a bow. Let's do it this way. If we live along the Connecticut shoreline, the I-95 corridor, we typically see 2.5 to 3 feet of snow. Let's say, approximately 30 to 35 inches. I would think it's going to be something like 40 to 45 inches along the Connecticut shoreline. And you come up to the Hartford area, you've got anywhere from 3.5 feet to 4 feet of snow, typically 40 to 45 inches in a normal winter in the Hartford area. I think it's a solid 50 to 55. Then you come up to your area, Dan. I normally get maybe 5 to 6 feet of snow in a winter. I'd say you're looking at 6 to 7 feet of snow this winter. So
a lot of snow.
I do see colder than average temperatures by a couple of degrees, maybe, especially in astronomical winter, because I think March will be cold. And you don't really get a reading of March in meteorological winter. So I think it's cold, and I also think it's above average snowfall for the winter season. And, you base it on all these variables that I threw out there. But again, you should go read Larry Cosgrove. You should read Judah Cohen. Very knowledgeable professionals that I respect very much.
Okay. Of a more immediate note, the weather map as we flip the calendar to December 1st is interesting on this date. So what does it look like on the weather map?
Yeah, Dan, we're cold out there today. No question about it. We've got high pressure in the Appalachians. We've got a brisk, cold northwest flow. And I think temperatures today are going to stay between 36 and 42 across the state all day long. So we've got a cold day. Now, you see my hat?
Yep. Big game
all
tonight.
Right. We're playing tonight. The New England Patriots against the Buffalo Bills at Foxborough. It's going to be brisk and it's going to be cold. Temperature, you'll see everybody bundled up in the stadium. Temperatures will be dropping from the 30s into the 20s, and there will be a brisk breeze overnight. For tomorrow, Dan, the high pressure system moves to around Atlantic City. We're kind of in the middle of the ridge, so sunshine, not much wind. Temperatures up into the 40s. Brad Field planning on perhaps putting out the snow stakes tomorrow. It'll be a nice day to get any outdoor decorating done, any outdoor work you need to do prior to the winter. Saturday, the 3rd of December, we've got a strong cold front approaching from the west. We'll have a strong southerly wind. As you mentioned, Dan, mild up into the 50s again with showers and windy conditions on Saturday. On Sunday, we turn colder again. High pressure in West Virginia, mixed sun and clouds, breezy. Temperature similar to today, 36 to 42 on Sunday. So definitely the brighter day is Sunday, but definitely the colder day is Sunday. High pressure located over Virginia and West Virginia on Monday. Sunshine, temperatures into the 40s. Tuesday, we've got a complex system coming at us. Ultimately, though, it will take a track that yields rain. The primary storm will come out of the Great Lakes. A secondary storm will try to form on the on the New Jersey coast, but I don't see it happening. I think the primary holds, ultimately moves into northern Maine. Ultimately, it gets mild here briefly. So I see on Tuesday, maybe some rain and snow showers. And up your way, Dan, it could snow for a couple hours or something. But then I think it turns to just showers. The mild air ultimately wins. We get a cold frontal passage on Wednesday, December 7th. I call it a day that will live in infamy, Dan. not because of Pearl Harbor, but of course because of Pearl Harbor. But also, it was the day I had my first date with my wife,
Ah,
Sandy.
how
So
about that?
I always tell her December 7th is a day that will live in infamy. But I have another meaning toward that. And then on Thursday, the 8th, so in other words, when you and I are sitting down to do our next
Right.
podcast, Dan, we're in a strong northerly flow, temperatures in the upper 30s. Say that ain't much for December 8th. But guess what? The Arctic front is poised right on, and I can see it perfectly. It's
Mm.
poised right on the Canada-New England border, and it's plunging south so that by late Friday, it's in the teens and windy. The
Mm.
wind's howling out of the north. And on Saturday, December 10th, high temperature only in the low to mid 20s. So the Arctic air is here. Everything will start freezing up and icing up. And the next storm that comes along after that, very, very, very good chance of being a snowstorm.
Okay. Wow. Well, I think number one on my list is to make sure my snowblower is fine-tuned and ready to go because it's going to be put to use quite frequently this winter. That's what I'm sensing anyway after our
That's what you're
conversation.
gleaning. I think that's what you're picking up, what I'm putting down.
Well, it should be interesting. Anything else we'd like to add before we wrap up the podcast, Brad?
Well, Dan, as I get older and hopefully wiser, the years just seem to fly by. I cannot believe it's already December.
I can't either.
Um, and just really try to take in and enjoy the time with your
Yes.
family and friends over the holiday season. And my only advice would be to slow it down a little bit.
Mhm.
I mean, you just take it easy. The it's not worth you find this out as you get older, but it's not worth getting all worked up about.
It's not. You're
Things
right.
always seem to work out,
Yep. Yeah,
don't they?
they sure do.
Yeah,
Absolutely
and
right.
you learn that kind of late in life, but
Mhm.
I've just had that sort of adjustment in the last
Mhm.
year or so. I'm starting to embrace the fact that I'm getting older and embrace the wisdom and so forth.
That's
And put up with
perfect
the
advice.
occasional aches and pains, but
Right.
that goes with the territory.
And the occasional heartbreaking loss from your favorite teams.
Oh my goodness, wouldn't it be sweet if we got a nice win tonight?
Oh, that would be something.
They're knocking on the playoff
Yeah,
door. I'd like to see them try to get a wild card, but
yeah.
tough schedule the rest of the way.
But a big game tonight. Well, that said, Brad, enjoy the game. And of course, our winter podcast will be posted not only on bradfieldweather.com, also have it on YouTube. We also show the video on bradfieldweather.com, in addition to you on a daily basis updating the forecast. It's all there right on the website, bradfieldweather.com.
Yep,
So,
love to do it every morning when I'm having my coffee, Dan. I'm working on that forecast that I ship off to you, and you post it for us, and much appreciation for that.
well, Brad, to you and Sandy and our podcast audience, have a great week, and we'll talk again next week.
All right, to you and Susan, Dan, and if people are watching us on the YouTube um, videos, I do not know what I am doing in terms of anything technical, because when I was in TV for the 37 years I was in TV, the production people did everything for you. They literally shined your shoes for you. I mean, they did everything. And I know nothing about how lights should be properly placed. So incrementally, we're getting better with these videos. Dan told me before we started that, yeah, you're doing a little better with the lighting than it was last week. And yeah, the audio is a little better than it was last week. We're getting there. We're getting there slowly, but it's just simply because I don't know what I'm doing.
Well, I mean, it's the world of multitasking. Now you've got situations where your local television station's production crew isn't located on site. They're located someplace down in Atlanta, Georgia. The whole dynamic has changed. It's
Dan,
crazy.
I told you this before, and I'll say it again. You and I were so lucky. We lived in the heyday
Yep.
of radio and television. I mean, people were riveted to listening to you and Brad Davis in the morning list the no school cancellations.
Yep.
Now that is dinosaur. Now no one listens to the radio for school cancellations. I mean, you would be listening to Bob Steele saying Avon Public Schools, Andover Public Schools, and then you say, "My God, I live in Woodstock. It's
Yeah,
going to
right.
take them a half an hour to
Yeah,
get to
yeah,
the
yeah, exactly.
W's."
He'd always go Deep River.
Dan, well, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, and you and Susan have a terrific weekend. And thanks for putting I think a lot of people. I always say New Englanders are closet snow lovers.
Yes.
They won't admit it. They'll say, "Oh, the snow," but they love it. They love it. That's why they live here. So the closet snow lovers are going to love this forecast.
Terrific. All right, my friend. Be well. We'll talk again soon.
You too, Dan. Bye-bye.
Thank you. The Brad Field Weather Podcast has been underwritten by McAllen Construction. McAllen Construction, from the first dig to the last nail. And remember, McAllen Construction also will do your snow removal.